Good morning. This is our second PowerPoint. If you did not watch the first PowerPoint, please do that as soon as possible because you probably missed your first assignment. So, we're going to jump right in. We're talking about kinesiology. And what is kinesiology? So, before we jump in, and hopefully some of you guys did your reading, remember you should be doing your reading prior to viewing these slides. These slides serve as a supplement to the text. As far as your one exam for the semester goes, everything that's in the text is fair game. And I try to serve as a supplement as much as possible. There are things that we probably won't go over in the slides. And that's usually what the class is for. So if you guys have questions about something specific from the text, always ask me. But we start the semester by thinking about well, what do we know about kinesiology? And I reviewed some of your posts, and some of you even said, oh, I had to Google what kinesiology is. Well, we have no idea. That's what this class is for. Serve as an introduction. Those of you that had maybe an idea or an inkling of what it was, did your thoughts change once you Googled it or once you looked in the text? Maybe. What I ask is that during this semester, you approach the semester with an open mind, because what you'll learn is that one definition might fit for a certain job or career, so to speak. So maybe physical therapy views kinesiology slightly different than athletic training. All right. And most importantly, as I kind of open every semester with every class, is realize that what you know right now is this much. This much. That's what we know right now, right? And our goal is to get it from this much to maybe that much. If you can't tell, I barely open my fingers, right? We know nothing, right? The more we know, the more we realize we don't know, right? That's a very common saying I use. So, like I said, go in with an open mind, realize there's a lot of great material for us to learn, and you'll get a lot out of this. The passage of information. That's important. Well, how do we know certain things? Well, there's common knowledge that, things that we were kind of just brought up to learn, right? So we know how to brush our teeth in the morning. We know that we probably should exercise to lose weight. That's, a common knowledge thing. What we know is that sometimes common knowledge is incorrect, right? There's things we do all the time which are common knowledge but might not be the most efficient or correct way even to do things. So like, for instance, if we're talking about exercising to lose weight, that's not exactly how it works. It's really, at the end of the day, it's calories in versus calories out, right? So if you just exercise but have the worst diet possible and you're taking in 7,000 calories of crap food a day, you're not going to lose weight. So, common knowledge sometimes might not be entirely correct. Ignore path dependence. We're going to go on to figures of authority. That's another way where you guys learn. So growing up, you learned a lot of common knowledge from your parents, which is a figure of authority. Right? We learn information from leaders, right? Governor Cuomo gives us all sorts of information all the time about certain things about COVID-19, which we learned a lot over the past 6 months. And then, you could look at your teachers. Your teachers, they teach you things. That's a way we pass information. And again, they're not always entirely correct either. And then finally, gurus. While sometimes gurus may provide information that seems correct, and sometimes it may, sometimes gurus just kind of come up with these systems that aren't exactly backed by research. They just are backed by what they do in practice, or maybe it worked for one person and they try to apply these broad-ranging solutions to a large population, which again isn't the best way to do things. Right? So we got to think about how we get our knowledge, and is it the best source? Okay. So now we're moving on to actually kinesiology. What the hell is kinesiology? That's a good question. That's a good question. So, kinesiology, in the simplest definition that fits most groups, is the study of physical activity. physical activity. And we get into physical activity pretty soon, but kinesiology is very broad, and this is a broad class, right? Kinesiology is this overarching umbrella to which a lot of physical activity categories and sciences fall under. Okay, so I have a graphic to show you, but we could look at physical, or we could look at underneath kinesiology as sports, physical therapy, athletic training. I mean, we talk a little bit about careers, right? These are all careers, occupational therapy, right? How should we view kinesiology with regards to school? Well, you can review kinesiology in your graphics on the next slide based on your classes, right? So kinesiology is this overarching umbrella, okay? And boom, underneath kinesiology, you have all of these classes. And I don't know if you could see some of these in the bottom right-hand corner, but you've got classes like motor control. You know, if you guys are within the kinesiology program here, I know some of you are in psychology, you know, you're going to have to take exercise physiology, motor control. You're going to have to take, you know, maybe some very specific physical therapy classes as you move on to graduate school. Okay, so kinesiology is this overarching one that everything else kind of falls under. Okay, so we go back to learning. So the first slide about passage of information was more just me speaking. Now we're going to talk about, this is directly from the text. There's three ways we learn. All right. Personal experience. We go through physical activity and we learn by just doing, right? We have this initial understanding when you pick up, let's say, a sport, right, and you start to do play basketball, we'll say, right? As soon as you pick up the ball, what do you, well, oh, okay, I feel the basketball. I feel how light or how heavy it is, right? I feel, you know, what it's like on my fingertips. Okay, I bounce the basketball. Oh, it bounces. That's interesting. It's not a rock. How high does it bounce? I don't know. It depends on how much air is in it. If I snap my wrist a little harder, it'll bounce a little bit more. You know, so as we're going through the physical activity, we're literally learning right away, right away, right away. And this personal experience is one way we learn things. Now, by doing, we can also enhance our understanding and integration of the literature. So, for instance, there might be a research paper which talks about, you know, again, I own a gym, so I often will provide anecdotal stories of things that I see on an everyday basis. So we'll talk about building muscle, right? Muscle hypertrophy. We read a text that says, oh, one of the big ways to add muscle is by providing good muscle damage. And there's a lot of literature and research which shows that muscle damage is intensified by doing specific negatives or eccentrics. Okay, for those of you that don't know what that is the slow lowering, right? If you got my bicep, that's the slow lowering phase. Okay, so if it's a bicep curl, we're going to slowly lower, really slowly. And if we exaggerate the eccentric component, that will add a little bit more of what we would call good muscle damage. And that, over time, should add more muscle. That's what science says, right? And all of a sudden, okay, well, that's what a research paper says. You go out and actually do it. You experience it. And I'll tell you right now, if you've never done like slow eccentrics or negatives and you add it into your gym routine, guess what? You're going to be sore and you'll be like, oh, this works. And once again, you are learning. All right? Aha! So the next thing of how we learn is the scholarly process. So there's literature out there in peer-reviewed journals which tell you all sorts of fun facts like which I just spoke about, which was like eccentrics and hypertrophy. Books, textbooks, your introduction to kinesiology book, your whatever textbook for every other class. We learn from these books at the university level, and the university level, which is school. Professional experience, right? So at the end of the day, you know, we have these problems out in the real world, and sometimes the textbook answers don't suffice. They just don't cut it. They're inappropriate because it's impossible for a textbook answer to cover these multifaceted problems. All right. So by personal experience, or excuse me, by professional experience, like actually being a physical therapist, we learn things. All right. Um, some things that are specifically highlighted, scholarly process and professional experience. Um, those are highlighted because of the falling under the academics of kinesiology. All right, so there's a certain thing where our personal experience, if we're just a 7-year-old kid, doesn't make it officially like an academic type of kinesiology, right? It's more of just us experiencing. But within school and within literature, right, this is academic kinesiology. Body of knowledge. All right, so these are just some random examples I kind of threw out there. Excuse me. About, official bodies of knowledge. Again, coming back to that academic body of knowledge. So the questions I kind of posed, like, well, would a university professor teaching you guys, me teaching you guys about kinesiology fall under an official body of knowledge? I mean, I'm not a research article, but the answer is yes, because I should be teaching you guys things based on research, evidence-based practice, which we talk about throughout the semester. Your cousin reading Bleacher Report? Yeah, probably not. An article from the Journal of Strength and Conditioning? Yeah, absolutely. The Journal of Strength and Conditioning is one of the more reputable journals or databases for strength training. A private AAU basketball coach? No, probably not. And then students in a motor control class. I would say this one kind of depends, right? This one kind of depends. Students in a motor control class? Well, I mean, we're at the university level. Are we undergraduate students? Maybe it's a PhD level class. I mean, those guys should fall in the official body of knowledge category because PhD students have the ability to teach. Okay, so something in that last example, it's a little, it's not so black and white. It's a little gray. Okay, some actual textbook definitions. Physical activity, right? We need to learn how to differentiate between physical activity and movement. So I'll give you guys a second. Sometimes I'll just kind of pause a little bit, let you guys think while you're listening to these slides. What is the difference between physical activity and movement? What is the difference between physical activity and movement? Think about it. Think about it. Let your brain kind of ponder. Are they different? Maybe. So let's start with just one. All right. So what's the definition of physical activity? Okay. So these are our guidelines. This is our working definition of physical activity that we will use. Intentional, voluntary movement directed towards achieving an identifiable goal. Okay. So the key words, right, that I kind of try to highlight: intentional. Okay, has to be intentional, right? So if I just blink or I'm breathing, right? These are involuntary. Blinking might just be a reflex, right? Unintentional. Directed towards achieving an identifiable goal. There needs to be a goal. All right, and movement is a change in position of one's body parts relative to each other. Okay, so me raising my hand, that is movement. Me blinking my eyes, that is movement. This is all movement. Me going for a 5-mile run, that would be considered movement. So the question that we ask are, is all movement considered physical activity? Is all physical activity considered movement? Think about it. Is all movement considered physical activity? Is all physical activity considered movement? The answer is yes, no. So the answer for the first one is no. Not all movement is considered physical activity, right? Because we can have involuntary movements. Okay, we have reflexes. Reflexes would not be considered physical activity. Okay, some movements might not have an identifiable goal. Then the next one, is all physical activity considered movement? And the answer is yes. Where if you look at the definition of physical activity, right, it says intentional voluntary movement. So movement is a prerequisite for physical activity. Okay, so the answer to the first one is no. The answer to the second one is yes. So like I said early on, definitions can vary, right, for physical activity. So the textbook provides this definition of the CDC, which is different than ours, right? So the CDC's definition is any bodily movement produced by skeletal muscle that increases energy expenditure above basal levels. Right, so they're talking about energy expenditure, basal levels, skeletal muscle, right? I think ours is a little bit more overarching, a little bit more general, a little bit more simplified. We don't have to worry about energy expenditure. I would say take a moment and think about how uh, you can define movement based on your career aspirations. Okay, I had a lot of you guys answer in the forum, and think about your career and how you would define physical activity. All right, so this is important. This is exam material. The American Kinesiology Association defines 4 core elements, right, for kinesiology. All right, the importance of physical activity. Oh, excuse me, for physical activity. The importance of physical activity in health, wellness, and quality of life. Scientific foundations. There needs to be research. They are based in research. It is not just some random somebody moving, them declaring that, hey, I lost body weight. Again, this comes back to the gurus. You know, hey, I lost 100 pounds by running 50 miles a week. If you do that, there needs to be a scientific foundation, right, of physical activity. It includes the cultural, historical, and philosophical dimensions of physical activity. We talk a lot about, a little bit about the history, all right, of kinesiology. And then lastly is the practice. So when we practice, right, there's many forms of physical activity. Dance, you've got exercise, you've got just fundamental movement, right? So these are just different things. So dance could be artistic, okay? It doesn't have to be exercise. You could have dance for exercise. You could have exercise like running, jogging, cycling, resistance training, okay? That could be physical activity. You have fundamental movements that could be physical activity. Getting up out of bed, all right? Walking to the bathroom. These are fundamental movements that also count as physical activity. Okay, you have sports. So sports don't necessarily fall into the exercise category, right? Because sports are considered a game with an identifiable goal to win something. Okay, there's a competition, and we talk about sports later, and there's all these rules for sports. So they don't necessarily fall under exercise, even though they might be overlapped. And then finally, therapy, right? We do physical activity at therapy. You know, when you're at physical therapy or occupational therapy, cardiovascular therapy, cardiac rehab, you're doing some type of physical activity. Okay. Careers. So as we already said, we've got this overarching umbrella with many different careers. Um, Start to think this semester, because that's part of your one of your end of the semester assignments, I believe. Let's see, I got the syllabus here. Career project, right? So we have to think about our career project. We have to start thinking about, well, does my career, how much education does my job, my dream job take? Okay, so higher learning is, if is a requirement for some. If you want to be, let's say you want to be a personal trainer and that's your life goal, and maybe you want to open a gym. I own a gym, right? You don't need to go to school. You don't. It's not a requirement, okay? If your dream job is to be a personal trainer, school might help, right? But it is not a requirement. However, in other fields, let's say you'd like to be a physical therapist. A physical therapist requires now a doctoral degree. That was not the case, I don't know, they probably changed that within the past 10 years, 12 years, something like that. I forget. Where now you have to get a doctoral degree. All right. Again, that's also different from athletic training, which now requires a master's degree. Okay. So start to think about what your dream job will require in terms of education. Some require a wider lens, some require a narrow. Also, don't forget that many people wound up changing their end career paths. Okay. I forget the statistic, but it's something like your average undergraduate student, or 60% I think of your average undergraduate students change majors at some point within their first 4 years of school. I mean, think about it, right? And some people within this class are probably like, oh, I'm just gonna float through this. I'm not really gonna listen. I'm not gonna, and some people will do that, right? But you don't know where you're gonna end up. Those of you maybe that are in psychology maybe don't think this class is particularly relevant to the field of psychology. You don't know where you're gonna end up. So what do I say? Open mind. Open mind. Some confusion. So there is some confusion, especially if you look at some program names, right? So I teach at Mercy College and I teach at Brooklyn College. And Brooklyn's program is a kinesiology program. Mercy is an exercise science program. What's the difference? Well, exercise science falls under that umbrella of kinesiology again, right? So it's specific to exercise, okay? Physical therapy, right? Once again, it falls under kinesiology and it's specific to physical therapy. And sorry, a fox just ran by my window. We're looking at like the elements of rehabilitation, and getting people restoring function of movement. Okay, restoring function is the key component of physical therapy. Okay, health and wellness. Once again, what is health and wellness? Well, that probably has a lot to do with the mental and the emotional side of a human being, in addition to movement and physical activity. Okay, so these aren't all the same. Academic versus applied. So it's pretty simple, right? If you think about it, right? Academic kinesiology is what we're doing, taught at the university level. Applied kinesiology is fieldwork, right? Fieldwork is just the simplest way to think about this. Fieldwork may not necessarily be grounded in academic work, and I've said this already earlier on in these slides, where sometimes when you're out in the field as a practitioner, whatever you're doing, you might be taught one way to do things, a textbook answer, and you may find that it's inappropriate. I'm telling you, it's going to happen all the time. You have to start to build your own model, right, and your own understanding of certain things. Maybe, in my case in the gym, right, the textbook, the Essentials of Strength and Conditioning textbook, which is right next to me. It's part of the gold standard for strength and conditioning professionals, right? It says that, okay, in order to, if you want to focus on strength, you're supposed to do whatever it is, 2 to 5 reps. If you want to focus on power, 1 to 3 reps. If you want to focus on muscular endurance, 10 plus reps, right? And hypertrophy is those things in between, like 8 to 12. Okay. Well, I can tell you right now, that's not the case, right? What we've seen and we're starting to find is that's not really the case, where you can really focus on hypertrophy, especially for certain individuals, in the 20 rep range. You could focus on strength in the 10 rep range. All right, you have to develop these models in the workplace that actually work not just for you, but more importantly, work towards the individual, right? And textbook material, right, academic kinesiology, is always the average. We're always taught the average in research, where if you actually read any research, it's the mean, right? The average person, one stat I already gave today is the average undergraduate student, 60% of them changes their major, okay? But that's the average. What about the people that are underneath the average or above the average? If we're talking about like building muscle again, we always come back to that because that's where I am, right? You know, we're taught that building muscle, the best way to do it is 3 sets of 10, right? Maybe somebody needs 5 sets of 10. Maybe one person only needs 1 set of 10. You have to, you, the expert within your field, have to figure out what works, right? So academic and applied, very different. And holism. So the interdependence of mind, emotion, spirit, and the body. What you will learn this semester is that there is much more to physical activity, and if you wanted to say working out, than just movement. Okay, there's much more to this kinesiology than just movement, and the well-being of an individual, right, is deeply rooted in our mind and emotions and spirit, not necessarily like faith, although faith can be part of it, right? But how we interpret things. So I don't believe the textbook talks about this, but the biopsychosocial model of health, where it's relatively new when it comes to health, right? When those are 3 different elements. The first one is bio, the biological, okay? Where let's say, I don't know, maybe you have a virus that is raising your temperature and causing a disruption to homeostasis, right? There's the biological component of health, and it's this reductionist viewpoint where it's like, because X is happening, Y will happen, right? It's very simple, clear cut, but there's more to it, which we've learned over the years, right? There's the psychological, okay? Um, what we've learned is that heartbreak is a real thing, right? So you've been dating somebody for 3-4 years, and all of a sudden you guys break up, okay? Well, what happens? You're emotionally distraught, and there's this physiological response, right, to heartbreak, right? So the psychological is going to have a profound impact on your well-being as well. And then finally, social, right? So kind of your environment will affect your health, right? Are you in a positive, nurturing environment, or do you have a good support system around you? All of these things will affect your health, right? So it's not just this like simplistic view where, all right, you have a virus, you're sick, yada yada yada, right? There's much more to it than that. I believe that is it for our slides today.